I did a podcast with the leader of the Red Arrows, former leader of the Red Arrows, Tim Miller, and they had third parties observing how they dealt with failure after each sortie, their training sorties and their operational sorties as an aerobatic team. They were brutal. I mean, in that they were brutally frank, they were honest, they weren't aggressive. They were just very, very, it became part of the culture that everybody accepted constructively the constructive criticism and dealt with it constructively for the benefit of the team. And I was commenting that that seems not to be quite so widely practiced outside of the airline environment or the airline flight deck environment, the flying environment. Getting, Julie, to the point that you were discussing, where sometimes change has to happen very, very quickly. From my airline experience, when you're sitting in a tube at 6 miles high over the North Atlantic and suddenly something really badly goes wrong, it has happened to me, that is the point where actually we, through our crew resource management training, engaged as many people as possible to solve the problem. And the communication was all over the place. We're speaking to oceanic control centers, the crew, the passengers, hearing everybody we could get involved. And it worked. And it does work in that environment where time is critical and actually saves time and often saves the aeroplane. And so from my own experience in that sort of that context, the inclusion of people in the decision-making process and the communication process early on is mind-blowing, because it really can, from the person who is apparently the most junior person on the airplane or in the system, can actually make the big difference about how that outcome might succeed. And so I'm still somewhat perplexed that there's this resistance to A, accepting criticism, but B, also widening the debate out to the wider stakeholder group, employees throughout the organization. And what are your thoughts on that? Is that a reasonable perspective of mine?
I think it's really. I often quote aviation as a sector that has turned itself around, because it did change that relationship between captain and first officer, and did make, because it used to be, I think, as I said, that captains were much more hierarchical. It was harder to challenge, but changing that relationship and giving the first officer the confidence to challenge, to question, and the captain the ability to listen, and rather than being threatened anyway. And yeah, no, absolutely. If we could replicate that in organisations, that being open to other people's views, having the confidence in a very constructive way to challenge,
Yeah.
how helpful that would be. So I often quote aviation because I think it is a sector that has done that. But yeah, and if only other sectors would do it too.
I mean, I would interject there that actually it's not only the first officer, but it's anybody
Right,
on the
yeah,
airplane. I mean,
right,
literally the
yeah,
most junior person who joined the company the day before yesterday
right,
can actually, and is encouraged to put their hand up and say, actually, I think the following.
yeah.
And then it's down to the organizational structure of the operation to filter that. So A, it gets there quickly, but also is acted upon appropriately. So sorry, Julie, you're
I was
about to
going to say,
say.
so therefore, what was it that made that shift possible then? What were the key elements that
Well,
enabled that?
yeah, it's like everything else in aviation. It's as a result of hard won knowledge. There were a lot of pretty serious accidents where the Papa India, for example, in the 70s, that they had the crash at Staines, which was again a dictatorial cross cockpit authority gradient. And so the airline industry brought in what was called crew resource management, which was actually utilizing the entire ecosystem, all the stakeholders, and how they all fit together and working together and doing the training together and integrating together and not being frightened to put your hand up. The Kegworth accident, for example, the cabin crew knew that the wrong engine was about to be shut down, but they didn't say anything.
Yeah.
That was 44 people died in that. The whole business of crew resource management works extremely well in a safety critical environment and a time bound environment.